So in this lecture we are basically going to discuss the question paper of 2024 mains economics optional. Now in this discussion we are taking basically what is the weightage of that past year question, that means how many questions are coming from the past year, because there is a perception that it is mainly a past year question based question. So how many questions were basically you can attempt based upon the past year, how many questions were new, then link between the paper and the test series that we are conducting, and out of that test series how many questions directly or indirectly came, and then overall the discussion of paper 1. So in this lecture I will be limiting to paper 1 only. So paper 1 plus whether it is a numerical based paper or whether there will be some mathematical question, whether there is some mathematical technique required to answer the economics optional paper, those things I will be taking into account or explaining. So just if you go by the question, first of all I will explain the weightage, that is what is the weightage of micro, macro, money banking and finance, international economics and growth and development. So usually the weightage is not static but it varies, but generally it remains in that range. So first we can discuss or take up that weightage. So paper of 2024, if you want to see that paper first, it will be better if you just see that question paper first. A clear copy when it will be uploaded on UPSC website, we will be uploading that, but you can see that question. The first was from micro, differentiate between perceived demand curve and the proportional demand curve in a monopolistic competitive market. Perceived or proportional ki बीच का difference, and this was basically a new question, not from the past year question. Never this question was asked from the monopolistic competition. The question usually came from the monopolistic was in terms of the excess capacity or the Chamberlain model. So usually वो question पूछेगा, but perceived and proportional, and fortunately this question was there in the test series part also, and it was the same question, differentiate between the perceived and the proportional demand curve. So I will show that with this PPT, like this question. So question number 1 was differentiate between perceived and proportional demand curve in a monopolistic competition market and explain why the proportional demand curve is steeper than the perceived demand curve. And just see that question in our test series. Test number 9, question number 7C. 7C was, it was same, differentiate between perceived demand curve and the proportional demand curve for differentiate between the perceived demand curve and the proportional demand curve, and how Chamberlain used these two demand curve to determine market equilibrium and firm in one diagram. So this was a 10 marks question, that was a 15 marks question, but the first part is same, differentiate between the perceived and the proportional demand curve. So if you have that question, that means वो new question के first, it was not a past year based question. So we are taking into account that new question that may be asked. And if you have that answer also ready with you, like टेस्ट की कैटेगरी में आपको ये आंसर भी अवेलेबल कराए जा रहे हैं. सो परसीव डिमांड का, दैट मीन्स इफ यू राइट दैट आंसर एग्जैक्टली मीन्स फ्रॉम द कोर बुक. So if you write it exactly in the sense that perceived demand curve is also known as planned sales demand curve, and it shows how much demand goes to a firm when competitors do not react to change in the particular firm price. So the perceived demand curve is the planned sales demand curve, and it shows how much demand goes to a firm when that firm assume that competitors will not react to that price change. Proportional demand curve is the actual sales demand curve, and it will take into account how competitors will react to that price change. So on the other hand, proportional demand curve shows how much demand goes to a particular firm when all firm charges same price. So these type of exact initial paragraph should be written in order to get more marks. If you are expecting in 10 that you will be getting about 6.5 or 7, then that type of exactness is there. Proportional demand curve is also called as the actual sales demand curve or market share demand curve, as it incorporates the actions of competitor to the price change by the firm. So it shows the full effect upon the sales of firm which results from any change in price that it charges. On the other hand, perceived demand curve does not take into account the full effect. Price competition, agar if firms are engaged in the price competition, then they are concerned with only the perceived demand curve. If they are engaged in the non-price competition, then they are concerned only with their market share. That is the proportional demand curve. So 4-5 डिफरेंसेज हैं, उस डिफरेंसेज को प्रेफरेबली आपको टेबुलर फॉर्म में ना करके इस तरीके के पैराग्राफ फॉर्म में प्रेजेंट करना है. दैट मीन्स यू हैव दैट क्वेश्चन ऑलरेडी. टेस्ट के अंदर भी क्वेश्चन आपने कर रखा है और मल्टीपल टाइम वो क्वेश्चन कर रखा है. You have the written part available in your lecture as well, and the same question is basically coming in the paper as well. So if you have written that content 2 or 3 times earlier, and if that question is coming, then out of that 10 we can expect about 6.5 or 10 you can out of 10 you can score. That means if you are aiming for a higher score, then in these type of question, जो question आपने टेस्ट के अंदर कर रखे हैं, अगर वो क्वेश्चन एज इट इज मिल जाता है, देन यू आर एक्सपेक्टेड टू मैक्सिमाइज योर स्कोर ऑन दैट क्वेश्चन पर्टिकुलरली. सो आई विल जस्ट लिंक शो द रिलेशन बिटवीन द क्वेश्चन पेपर एंड द टेस्ट सीरीज एंड द मॉडल आंसर. कमिंग बैक टू दैट टॉपिक वाइज पार्ट फर्स्ट. In this paper, this is the overall breakup. I have just disaggregated all the informations. The weightage of micro means market structure, welfare, distribution, and Marshallian and Wallachian approach. So all club. The weightage of that question, weightage of micro was 75, and in fact there were 5 questions. Only 1 question in the compulsory section, section A के अंदर, which is this proportional perceived demand curve. 1 20 mark question and 3 15 marks questions. What is significantly missing in this question paper is this section of distribution. ठीक है, distribution का I don't think they have asked even 1 question from the distribution category. तो distribution वाला section completely missing है. From market structure they have asked 1 perceived and proportional demand curve, and 1 is the describe the short run and long run equilibrium of firm under monopolistic competition. That was for 15 marks. And so micro वाले सेक्शन के अंदर और एक वेलफेयर का 20 मार्क्स का क्वेश्चन है. डिराइव द पैरेटो ऑप्टिमलिटी कंडीशन with 2 commodities, 2 factor and 2 producers. So it was 2 by 2 by 2 model. So it was a general question. So in the micro the weightage was 75, macro weightage was relatively more, and in that also weightage was more for the classical concept. So there was a classical loanable theory, classical theory of interest भी पूछा गया, और neoclassical loanable fund भी पूछा गया. That neoclassical was a new question. ठीक है, न्यू क्वेश्चन इन द सेंस दैट वाज नॉट आस्क्ड अर्लियर. तो यूजुअली हम फंड भी अगर पढ़ रहे हैं तो चैप्टर नंबर 3-4 के अंदर क्लासिकल थियरी ऑफ इंटरेस्ट तो डिटेल में पढ़ रखा है, लोनेबल फंड थियरी ऑफ इंटरेस्ट. बट द क्वेश्चन वाज व्हाट वर द अजम्पशंस ऑफ द न्यू क्लासिकल लोनेबल फंड थियरी ऑफ इंटरेस्ट. सो आई विल एक्सप्लेन दैट पार्ट. बट मैक्रो 1 क्वेश्चन वाज न्यूमेरिकल, 1 question of 15 marks was of numerical, and remaining was theoretical. 2 question, I think 2 or 3 question we can say from the classical section and remaining from the Keynesian part. But significantly ISLM के क्वेश्चन से सिर्फ न्यूमेरिकल वाला पार्ट है. क्लासिकल कंसेप्ट, लोनेबल फंड थियरी, इंटरेस्ट, फिशर और कैश बैलेंस इक्वेशन अगेन इन मैक्रो. सो वेटेज ऑफ मैक्रो सेक्शन वाज 85, and from money banking and finance they asked 3 question, but 2 question compulsory section में थे, and both were new. 2 question from the compulsory and in compulsory, and both were new in the sense it was not asked in the past year. So one was the how ad valorem tax will be preferred over the specific quantity tax from the firm point of view, and treasury bill का importance in the money supply. So 2 question relatively new we can say in the money banking and finance section. Second section was तो ये first paper के अंदर हो गया, first section 75, 85 and 40. तो 200 marks basically ये section A था. Section A generally माइक्रो, मैक्रो और मनी बैंकिंग एंड फाइनेंस होता है. सेक्शन बी इवनली डिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड बिटवीन इंटरनेशनल एंड ग्रोथ एंड डेवलपमेंट. So in the international economics, 3 question in the compulsory, 120 mark question and 3 15 marks question, 95. And in the growth and development, 2 question in the compulsory, 2 question of 20 marks and 3 question of 15 marks, 105. So that was basically the breakup. So when you are preparing, you must know that section B is mainly the growth and development and international, and their weightage is around 100. 100 मार्क्स का क्वेश्चन यूजुअली है. सो दिस इज 200 and 200, 8 क्वेश्चन आपके पास अवेलेबल होते हैं. यू अटेम्प्ट 5 नंबर. पेपर 800 का है. यू आर अटेम्प्टिंग 250 मार्क्स क्वेश्चन. यू आर अटेम्प्टिंग 5 क्वेश्चन आउट ऑफ 8 क्वेश्चन. सो दिस इज द ब्रेकअप ऑफ ऑल क्वेश्चन, ऑल पार्ट्स. So all parts means 28 sub parts are there, and you attempt 19 sub parts out of that. So I think it is clear. Now come to the question part of it. So the first question was this perceived and proportional demand curve, and you find that question in the test series. You have that written part as well. Then go to the second question. Second question says describe critically the phenomenon of classical dichotomy. Describe critically the phenomenon of classical dichotomy. This was question in the paper, and in the test series, test number 1 itself, question number 4A, 4B, that question is compare and contrast classical dichotomy and monetary neutrality. Compare and contrast classical dichotomy and monetary neutrality with Keynesian view. So you are explaining the same thing here, but again this was question for 10 marks and that was question for 15 marks. So if you know a topic, like again I repeat, what will be mattering in scoring will be the exactness. If you define the classical dichotomy term as it is, as explained in the front, that it refers to the theoretical separation between nominal variables and real variables. Give some example of nominal variable like quantity of money, price, nominal wage, nominal money supply. Then if there is change in one nominal, it will affect other nominal without affecting any real number. So change in the money supply will affect price, but it will not affect employment, it will not affect output, and it mainly arises due to neutrality of money. And neutrality of money means, when you say that money is neutral, it means money is irrelevant in determining the real numbers or real factors like employment, output and so on. Then you have to elaborate that, use a classical model diagram, production function, labor demand, labor supply, and then you can show that if money demand, money supply will increase, then only classical AD will shift, only price will rise without affecting employment and the output. So you have to elaborate that part basically. So find that question. Now question number 1C was new. It says show that ad valorem tax is preferable to a specific sales tax for a firm point of view in generating the same level of tax revenue. So when we discuss the ad valorem tax, so ad valorem is basically percentage. It will swivel the demand curve rather than shifting the demand curve parallel. And in the case of quantity tax or the specific tax, it will shift it parallel. So we have to take same revenue. So if we are taking the same revenue, then we have to show here that why ad valorem tax is preferred over the quantity tax from the firm's point of view. So that was a new question, needs to be elaborated. Then 4th D, you can see that question. Show that ad valorem tax is preferable to a specific sales tax in generating same revenue. Then it was examine the role of treasury bill in controlling money supply. So how treasury bill, the concept of treasury bill and how it helps in controlling the money supply. That means how the treasury bill is being used in order to finance the government budget deficit. And by financing that budget deficit, basically central bank create high powered money, and by creating that high powered money, it affect the money supply. So how the treasury bill is impacting the money supply. So these two questions I highlighted at the beginning, that we can say these two in the compulsory itself, और ये दोनों public finance की category में हम रह सकते हैं, money banking and finance में, and both were new as far as these two questions you have never seen in the past year. Plus this question also. Write down the major assumption behind the new classical loanable fund theory of interest. Major assumptions behind the new classical loanable fund theory of interest. So we know the classical theory of rate of interest, and that was also asked in the same paper. Classical theory का question भी है, critically analyze classical theory of interest, but ये तो direct question है, इसमें कोई complexity नहीं है. But here the question was explain the or write down the major assumptions of the neoclassical loanable fund theory of interest. Neoclassical loanable fund theory. So neoclassical loanable fund theory of interest as given by Wixell highlighted that the rate of interest is affected not only by the real factors but also by the monetary factors. First important point is that क्लासिकल कंसेप्ट रियल एनालिसिस है, तो क्लासिकल कंसेप्ट अगर रियल एनालिसिस है दैट मीन्स इन द क्लासिकल कंसेप्ट रियल फैक्टर विल अफेक्ट द रियल रेट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट, बट द न्यू क्लासिकल एग्रीड दैट द रेट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट इज बीइंग डिटरमाइंड आल्सो बाय द मॉनेटरी फैक्टर्स, सो दे एडेड दैट मॉनेटरी फैक्टर आल्सो इन द पिक्चर. So that was the important departure from the classical thought. Then in the classical, obviously when you explain the neoclassical you have to compare with the classical, in what way they modified it. Although the question was limited only to the assumption part, you are not expected to elaborate the entire loanable neoclassical loanable fund theory of interest, but you highlighted one part is that it differs from the classical in that sense, it incorporated the monetary factors. Then when we explain the classical concept, it take into account only saving as the supply of loanable fund and demand for loanable fund only by the firms and by the government. But when we explain the neoclassical concept, so in the neoclassical concept, supply of the loanable fund, one part is obviously the saving, other part could be the dishoarding, third part is basically bank money, and other is the disinvestment. तो डिसहोर्डिंग का मतलब है जो पास्ट में हमने मनी को होल्ड कर रखा उसको आज की रेट में हम लेंड कर रहे हैं, और डिमांड फॉर मनी, नाउ डिमांड फॉर मनी फॉर द इन्वेस्टमेंट आल्सो एंड डिमांड फॉर मनी कुड बी फॉर द होल्डिंग आल्सो. वी वांट टू जस्ट कीप दैट मनी इन आइडल कैश, फॉर दैट पर्पस आल्सो वी कैन डिमांड द मनी. सो इट कुड बी फॉर द इन्वेस्टमेंट, इट कुड बी फॉर द डिस सेविंग, और इट कुड बी फॉर द होल्डिंग पर्पस एज वेल. तो जब न्यू क्लासिकल कंसेप्ट एक्सप्लेन करें तो यहाँ पे आपको अदम्पशंस एक्सप्लेन करने को होगा कि what are the assumptions. So assumptions are there. So one important assumption was that the market for loanable fund is fully integrated market. The market for loanable fund is a fully integrated market characterized by mobility of funds throughout the market. That means funds can move throughout the market. So it is characterized by fully integrated market. That is one assumption. Second is there is, like the classical, it is said that there is a perfect competition in the market, so that only one rate of interest will prevail. It can't be the different rate of interest. So like just like in the perfect competition firms are price taker, in this part also the rate of interest is given. So we have only one rate of interest based upon perfect competition assumption. That is the second assumption. Third says flexibility of interest rate is assumed. बिकॉज क्लासिकल कंसेप्ट है, क्लासिकल कंसेप्ट में प्राइस फ्लेक्सिबल होते हैं, वेजेस फ्लेक्सिबल होते हैं, तो जब लोनेबल फंड की बात होगी तो इंटरेस्ट रेट फ्लेक्सिबल है. सो इंटरेस्ट रेट फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी विल इंश्योर दैट डिमांड एंड सप्लाई ऑफ लोनेबल फंड बिकम्स इक्वल. क्लियर. फोर्थ assumption was that the theory is stated in the flow term considering flow of demand for and supply of loanable fund. So it is basically a flow theory. Then next assumption says the theory assumes full employment of the resources. So just like in the classical concept, it also assumes full employment, मतलब output equal to full employment level. Another assumption is that money is assumed to play an active role in determining the rate of interest. Money is assumed to be playing an active role, जबकि classical concept में money do not play a role in determining the rate of interest, but in the neoclassical money play an important role. Now if you know that assumptions and if you have written it earlier, in that case you can attempt this question. ठीक है. तो for that purpose obviously you have to go by the lecture. Not, this was not a question in the test series category, but if you know that assumptions. So the problem I will say for 1 or 2 question was, even if you are not knowing it directly the neoclassical, but you have the general idea of the neoclassical, then also you can write few assumptions on your own. So the problem was basically, first question was the direct, second was also direct, we can say classical dichotomy. Few new questions that highlights why there is need to cover the new question. Your preparation should not be based only upon the past year. Now if you see this 5 question in compulsory, I will say 1 question from the past year, and that question was classical dichotomy. Rest, because proportional or perceived was in our test but not in the past year question. Neoclassical concept is in the lecture but not covered in the past year question. So you can say only 1 question from the past year, and the all 4 questions were relatively new. So your preparation should be incorporating the new question as well, but this was limited to that first question. After that you will find many past year question. So you are not rejecting any idea that it is not based upon past year question, it is based upon past year question, but just doing the past year question is not enough, because if it comes in a compulsory question then you are trapped. Sectional question के अंदर है, then you have the option to leave it, but here if you are not knowing with what is perceived and proportional, then problem is there. If you do not know the neoclassical loanable fund theory of interest, then there is a problem. So first compulsory question was incorporating, we can say, overwhelmingly new question and only 1 question as past year. But if you go by the second question, now come to that PPT part. This the first question was basically derive the Pareto optimality condition in production for 2 commodities. So it was 2 by 2 by 2 model. So you have to explain production efficiency MRTS X equal to MRTS Y, consumption efficiency MRS A to MRS B, and simultaneous efficiency, that is MRS A MRS B equal to MRPT. So this was a direct question, we can say, already covered in the past year also. And write down the behavioral assumptions used in the Marshallian and Wallachian approach of market stability. And in the test category it was again, how does the Wallachian approach is a stable and unstable equilibrium differ from the Marshallian approach. So Marshallian or Wallachian approach का ये question, you find it in this part. So a small topic is there, Marshallian and Wallachian approach, only few questions are there, बट वो रिपीट होकर के पेपर के अंदर मिल जाते हैं. देन द थर्ड क्वेश्चन, डिस्क्राइब द शॉर्ट रन एंड लॉन्ग रन इक्विलिब्रियम ऑफ फर्म अंडर मोनोपोलिस्टिक कंपटीशन. शॉर्ट रन एंड लॉन्ग रन इक्विलिब्रियम, तो इन द शॉर्ट रन फर्म्स कैन अर्न सुपर नॉर्मल प्रॉफिट और देयर कुड बी लॉस, बट इन द लॉन्ग रन सिंस एंट्री एंड एग्जिट इज फ्री, देन फर्म्स मस्ट बी अर्निंग ओनली नॉर्मल प्रॉफिट. So you have to explain the short run description part first, but in short run explain the case of supernormal profit, explain the case of loss के अंदर highlight करने के why firm will operate in loss, because firm is having operating profit. So if price is greater than the average variable cost, firm will operate despite loss. And why in the long run firm will have only normal profit, because there is free entry and exit. So explain that part in question number 2C. Then when you come to question number 3, ऐसे क्वेश्चन भी अगर आप इसको कवर कर रहे हैं तो ये डिस्क्राइब द शॉर्ट एंड लॉन्ग रन इक्विलिब्रियम ऑफ मोनोपोलिस्टिक कंपटीशन है, एंड डिफरेंस बिटवीन द मोनोपोलिस्टिक कंपटीशन एंड परफेक्ट कंपटीशन इन द लॉन्ग रन. तो लॉन्ग रन का डिस्क्रिप्शन ऑलरेडी इसके अंदर कवर था. सो इफ़ यू नो द कंसेप्ट ऑफ लॉन्ग रन, यू कैन ऐड द कंसेप्ट ऑफ शॉर्ट रन इन दैट. तो शॉर्ट रन का मतलब होता है कि जहाँ पे फर्म्स कैन नॉट एंटर एंड देयर विल बी सम फिक्स कॉस्ट, एंड लॉन्ग रन मीन्स फर्म्स कैन एंटर, फर्म्स कैन लीव and there is no fixed cost also. Then third A is explain the concept of underemployment equilibrium with graphical illustration. Why full employment cannot be reached automatically in the Keynesian approach. So that was question in the paper, and you will find that answer in both question. In fact test 2 के अंदर 4A में, test 12 में question number 3C के अंदर. What do you mean by the classical theory of employment? How Keynes improved upon the classical? So that question, that answer is helping here. In the Keynesian system, aggregate demand determine the condition of labor market, whereas in the classical, labor market take care of itself. So the question was basically the concept of underemployment equilibrium and why full employment cannot be automatically achieved in the Keynes. Mainly because Keynes assumed wage rigidity, and in the classical wages are flexible. So due to flexibility of wage, the labor market is always in equilibrium in the classical model, and due to rigidity of wage, and now rigidity has been explained also, wages has been rigid due to the government minimum wage law. It is rigid mainly because of labor union. It could be rigid because of the efficiency wage theory. So if labor demand and labor supply are in equilibrium at a particular wage, but if due to rigidity wages are higher, then labor demand will be less, supply will be more, and there will be unemployment. That means you can explain that part simply by graphically, in the sense you can draw the labor demand and labor supply. This will be the market equilibrium wage, but if the rigid wage is higher, so if that rigid wage is higher, you will find a gap, and that gap will be called as unemployment. Then third B was a numerical question. So always we keep on saying that numerical question की practice आपको करके रखनी है. तो in every test you find basically few numerical questions. जैसे टेस्ट नंबर 1 के अंदर ही है, कंजम्पशन का फंक्शन गिवन है, इन्वेस्टमेंट गिवन है, गवर्नमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर है, मनी सप्लाई है, मनी डिमांड है, राइट डाउन आईएस इक्वेशन, फाइंड इक्विलिब्रियम इनकम एंड इंटरेस्ट रेट. यहाँ पे जैसे एक वैल्यू इन्फॉर्मेशन डिफरेंट है. Information different in the sense that if you see that question here, the question was this: calculate the equilibrium income and interest rate by using the appropriate macroeconomic model, that means ISLM model here. And the informations given were: one is the aggregate saving, second is tax function, third is investment function, money demand or money supply. So from money demand and money supply we can find the LM equation. So there was no problem in that. So when you write for the LM equation, it was 0.4y minus 0.5r is equal to 40. So 0.4y is equal to 40 plus 0.5r, and y will be equal to 100 plus 1.25r. तो यहाँ पे कोई इशू नहीं है, LM कर्व लिखने में कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. बट व्हेन यू राइट फॉर द IS इक्वेशन, फॉर IS इक्वेशन यू राइट y इक्वल टू c प्लस i प्लस g. अब गवर्नमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर गिवन नहीं है, y इक्वल टू c प्लस i लिखना है, बट कंजम्पशन की जगह यहाँ फंक्शन गिवन है सेविंग. तो अगर सेविंग का फंक्शन गिवन है तो यू कैन कैलकुलेट कंजम्पशन बाय सब्ट्रैक्टिंग सेविंग फ्रॉम इनकम. मतलब वी कैन फाइंड कंजम्पशन एज y माइनस एस. इनकम से सेविंग माइनस करेंगे तो कंजम्पशन की वैल्यू आ जाएगी. तो सेविंग y आपने लिख दिया, ये टर्म पहले माइनस लिखा और उसके बाद कंप्लीट फंक्शन यहाँ पे सब्स्टिट्यूट कर दिया सेविंग का. तो सेविंग हो गया -40 प्लस 0.5 y माइनस टी प्लस 0.25 r, और जहाँ पे फिर t लिखना होगा, t की जगह आपको ये फंक्शन लिखना है, t की जगह ये फंक्शन लिखेंगे. आप t के लिए अगर आप ये फंक्शन लिखते हैं तो व्हाट यू विल बी गेटिंग एज द फाइनली यू विल बी गेटिंग द IS इक्वेशन. अब इस प्रोसेस को अगर आप फॉलो करते हैं तो यू विल गेट IS इक्वेशन एज, मतलब सिंपली अगर आपने सेविंग इक्वल टू इन्वेस्टमेंट भी कर रखा है, बिकॉज गवर्नमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर गिवन नहीं है और सेविंग में टैक्स ऑलरेडी इंक्लूडेड है, इवन देन यू विल बी गेटिंग द सेम आंसर. तो इफ़ यू डू दैट एक्सरसाइज, मतलब आपने पहले कंजम्पशन का फंक्शन निकाला, कंजम्पशन फंक्शन सॉल्व करने के बाद y इक्वल टू c प्लस i लिखा है, एंड देन सॉल्व इट. Then IS equation in this example you will be getting as 175 minus 1.25 R. एक इक्वेशन आपका ये आ रहा होगा इफ यू डू कैलकुलेशन करेक्टली. IS इक्वेशन ये है, LM इक्वेशन की वैल्यू ये है. सो वन इक्वेशन इज IS कर्व, सेकेंड इक्वेशन इज फॉर LM कर्व. सो सिंपली आपको y इक्वल टू दिस, y इक्वल टू सी राइट साइड इक्वेट करेंगे. इक्वेट करने के बाद यू विल गेट द रेट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट वैल्यू एज 30 और 30 की वैल्यू को किसी भी फंक्शन में डाल दो, आइदर IS में या LM इक्वेशन में. इन दैट केस यू गेट इनकम ऑफ 137.5. यहाँ तक करना, ये 10 मार्क हो गया वन सेक्शन. इजी क्वेश्चन, इसमें कोई डिफिकल्टी नहीं है. सो आई थिंक मोस्ट ऑफ द स्टूडेंट्स जिन्होंने एक बार दो बार भी एक दो क्वेश्चन टेस्ट वाले कर रखे हैं तो उन्हें पता है कि व्हाट यू हैव टू डू. इसमें कोई मैथमेटिकल स्किल रिक्वायर्ड नहीं है, सिंपल कैलकुलेशन है. यू मस्ट नो हाउ टू राइट इक्वेशन ऑफ IS एंड LM. एंड सेकेंड पार्ट कह रहा है व्हेन मनी सप्लाई इंक्रीजेज बाय 20 हाउ इक्विलिब्रियम इनकम विल चेंज. तो मनी सप्लाई विल अफेक्ट द LM कर्व. सो व्हेन यू राइट द न्यू LM कर्व, in the new LM curve just write in place of this 40 write 60 because money supply increases by 20. तो यहाँ पे आप 60 लिख देंगे, ये इक्वेशन बदल जाएगा. उस इक्वेशन को दोबारा से I से इक्वेट कर दोगे, न्यू R और न्यू Y की वैल्यू आ जाएगी. अब ऐसे क्वेश्चन में एक्सपेक्ट इफ यू आर प्रेजेंटिंग वेल देन एक्सपेक्ट फुल. क्लियर? So again this is the only numerical asked in this paper. So out of 28 question only one section was numerical and that too not a difficult one. ठीक है, it was not a difficult question, it does not require any differentiation, integration, it is a simple calculation problem. Then fourth question was describe the mechanism of the credit creation. So this was for this. Analyze the classical loanable theory of interest. Classical theory of interest ये ऑलरेडी यहाँ पे पूछा गया टेस्ट के अंदर. Compare and contrast loanable fund theory with the liquidity preference. Remember, even when you are answering this type of question, direct question, you are explaining the classical theory, you have to compare that theory with the alternate theory. And the alternate theory is the liquidity preference theory given by Keynes. So liquidity preference में rate of interest is determined by the demand and supply of the liquidity, that is demand and supply of the money. Loanable fund theory के अंदर rate of interest is determined by supply and demand of the loanable fund. तो उस loanable fund के assumptions को explain करना है. bond markets के साथ उसको relate करके explain करोगे कि by using the saving household will buy the bond, it could be a private bond or a government bond. Firms are issuing those bond in order to raise money for investment and government is issuing bond in order to raise money for meeting its budget deficit. Then the fourth was describe the mechanism of credit creation of commercial bank and implication on the multiplier effect. So basically if you know the process of the deposit multiplier, money multiplier, so how banks create money, if you are familiar with that dimension, then you can explain this question. So this was there in a test. Compare the deposit multiplier with the money multiplier and is there any impact on money multiplier arising out of massive use of credit card and the debit card. So you are explaining basically the similar process of credit creation. Then fourth, this question was again not directly from past year. Question was distinguish between public good and private good and explain how market will fail in the case of public good. तो public good और private good के बीच का difference पूछा गया. And you find that question in test number 3, question number 6a. Distinguish between public good, private good and mixed good. So main difference between public and private is that if a good is a public good, then it is characterized by two important features, non-arrival and non-exclusion. Non-rivalness means consumption of that good by one person. does not reduce its quantity available for the other person, like a street light. If one person is benefited from the street light, the light does not get reduced for the other person. Second, it is characterized by non-exclusion, which means if public good is provided by government or by any agency, then it is not possible to exclude a person from consuming it, because if you exclude, it will be Pareto inoptimal, because if you include that person and it is non-rival also, so that means you can make someone better off by including without making anyone else worse off. Now, due to that non-exclusion problem, there is a problem of free rider. Person will try to get benefit of it without making any payment, and if everyone try to become a free rider, then public good cannot be provided at all. So, to explain the difference between public and private good, explain the problem of free rider and relate that free rider from the. Now, this was question expected earlier, in the sense from asymmetric information they have asked question. Market failure arises because of mainly three reasons: asymmetric information, then externality and public good. So, asymmetric information was already there in 2016-17 question. Externality was there, SDF common way पूछ लिया था. So, public good was basically left to be asked. So, difference between public good and private good and how market fails. So, again we can say this is a new question. And the fourth C was last in section A. What is the difference between Fisher theory and Cambridge cash balance approach to the quantity theory of money? And you have that question in the test series. What is the similarity and difference between Fisher and Cambridge version of quantity theory of money? So, you have that question plus the answer part of it, you have to just write it in the same manner. But again, this was a repeated question, you can say. The past year में कई बार पूछा गया. So, if you see many questions in fourth C part, sorry, this is public good and private good, and for Fisher equation and Cambridge equation. Clear? So, this was in section A. Section B is basically dominated by international and growth and development, and in this international and growth and development section, most of the question we can say were from the past year question, except for 1, 2, 3 and 4. I highlight those questions as, like first compulsory question here, critically examine per capita GDP as crude indicator of development. So, it was a general question, okay, what way GDP per capita can be considered as a crude indicator of the development. So, explain that as meaning part also, and what is the limitation of it also. So, it is a unidimensional concept. Per capita income takes into account only income as the dimension, but ignoring the achievement in the life expectancy, in education, and distribution of income. So, those things not included in the per capita GDP. So, you have to critically examine, that means you have to find out the drawback. First explain the meaning. डेवलपमेंट टर्म यूज़ कर रखे हैं, तो डेवलपमेंट को भी आप एक्सप्लेन करेंगे कि डेवलपमेंट इज़ अ मल्टी डायमेंशनल कंसेप्ट विच ब्रिंग्स क्वालिटेटिव चेंज इन द लाइफ, बट डेवलपमेंट हैज़ बीन मेजर्ड बाय द ह्यूमन डेवलपमेंट इंडेक्स which include per capita GDP also for decent standard of living, but it also include life expectancy index, it include education index. And similar question is not that this is the only part, in one more question I think HDI का concept भी है, पूछा गया. Then what is managed floating and sterilized intervention? That managed floating and sterilized intervention was already there in explain managed floating and sterilized intervention in the exchange rate, and in test it was in the managed floating is managed floating and intermediate exchange rate. So, here what is the sterilized intervention? Managed floating actually means that the central bank is managing the exchange rate, in the sense if demand for foreign currency and supply of foreign currency has imbalance, suppose demand for dollar is more and supply of dollar is less, then central bank will sell from its foreign exchange reserve. That means central bank will increase the supply of dollar. By selling the dollar, central bank takes away money. So in that way, money supply in the economy get reduced. But at the same time, if central bank reduces repo rate, reduces CRR or SRR, then money supply will increase. So if central bank on one hand sell the dollar, which reduces the money supply, on the other hand it reduces the repo rate, which increases the money supply, then we can say that that intervention is sterilized. तो sterilized intervention में money supply change नहीं होती है. Only in the case of non-sterilized, money supply will change. And what is managed floating? Floating means flexible. So in the flexible exchange rate system, central bank intervene in the exchange rate market in order to manipulate the exchange rate, in order to reduce the volatility in the exchange rate system. Then another question in that compulsory was discuss how carbon trading is helpful in reducing environmental degradation. तो ये क्वेश्चन अब कई बार पेपर के अंदर है, तो नेचुरली ये क्वेश्चन अब आपको टेस्ट सीरीज के अंदर भी मिल जा रहे हैं. इट वाज discuss how carbon trading is helpful in mitigating, reducing the environmental degradation. This was question here. And in test number 12, question number 5 say what are carbon market, how do they help in mitigating environmental pollution. So in this type of question you don't have to think anything, just you have the written or write up ready, और अगर आपने उसको लिख रखा just write it as it is. Exactness will matter basically, how exact you are writing. It is one thing that you have the idea, you know the concept, and you are writing in the examination in your own words, and it is altogether different if you know the idea, you know the concept, you have written it in your notebook, you have practiced in the daily answer writing, you have practiced in the test, and then you are writing. That will bring exactness, and that exactness actually matters. If it even if it matters for 1 mark, say if you are getting 5 or 6 or 5.5 or 4.5, one question makes huge difference. You attempt 19 question in one paper, 38 question in total, paper 1 and paper 2. So 38 marks का difference हो जाता है अगर हम एक नंबर का difference भी create करें तो. And that is a huge difference between, you can say, a score of 240 and 278. Then higher tariff do not increase employment. Import tariff का एक question था, and the question was also there in this import quota and tariff, but that was a new question. Then fifth E was based upon the offer curve. Examine how equilibrium terms of trade are determined by using offer curve of the trading partner. Offer curve of the trading partner. And what role does the offer curve play in determining the international trade? And not only this question was asked only once, this question was asked in test number 10 also, test number 5 also. Explain how offer curve will state the terms of trade between two countries. So definition of offer curve must be exact. A little bit of we can say derivation part, why it is bending backward, how the intersection determine the world equilibrium, and what is the significance of terms of trade, and when offer curve can be affected by import tariff or export subsidy. Briefly आप इसको ऐड कर सकते हो. Now the remaining one was the state question. ये डायरेक्ट ये क्वेश्चन इनफैक्ट कई बार इकोनॉमिक सर्विस में इसी फॉर्मेट में पूछा गया है. एंड दिस इज 6A. Discuss elasticity approach and absorption approach for adjustment in the balance of payment. I think in economic service I 3-4 times इसी ऑर्डर में सेम स्टेटमेंट के साथ है. दैट इज़ वाई आई रिकमेंड कि आप दोनों ही क्वेश्चन देखते हो. प्रिपरेशन अगर आप सिविल सर्विस के लिए भी कर रहे हैं, जस्ट सी द क्वेश्चन ऑफ द इकोनॉमिक सर्विस, मेनली द जनरल इकोनॉमिक सेकंड पेपर, थर्ड पेपर, इंडियन इकोनॉमी पेपर. Elasticity approach and absorption approach are two approach for adjustment of the balance of payment. Elasticity approach will focus on the supply side, and absorption approach focuses on the demand side. Means when you write y equal to c plus I plus g plus x minus m, then you write x minus m is equal to y minus c plus I plus g. So that c plus I plus g is called absorption. So c plus I plus g is absorption. So it is y minus a, and this is x minus m is your trade balance. So if you have a trade imbalance, it means absorption is more than income. So we can have to reduce the absorption. Absorption reduce करने के लिए you have a monetary policy, you have fiscal policy. By monetary contraction you increase interest rate. At high interest rate there will be lower investment. Fiscal contraction will reduce the government expenditure. So highlight that, that means you are managing the demand part. So if economy is at the full employment level, you can't reduce the change the output. You have to reduce the absorption in order to improve your trade imbalance. Plus you can add the Marshall-Lerner condition in the elasticity approach. That is elasticity, sum of elasticity of export plus import has to be greater than 1. अब ये काफ़ी अच्छे से ऑलरेडी सल्वाटोर के अंदर, तो प्रेफरेबली जो कंटेंट लैंग्वेज वहाँ यूज़ किया गया वही आपको यहाँ यूज़ करना. अगेन दिस इज अ रिपीटेड वन, स्टॉपलेस सैमुअल्सन थ्योरम, द पॉसिबल इफेक्ट ऑफ फ्री ट्रेड ऑन इनकम इनइक्वालिटी इन द डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज. This is a new one we can say. Explain how the elasticity of demand for foreign exchange is influenced by elasticity of home demand for import and by elasticity of home supply of import competing goods. So again now you have to think, because this is an application based category question. So out of 28 you will be getting some occasionally, but problem तब होता है when you know to that question very well and now you are facing with this question. So it is not a difficult one in that sense, but question इसका well prepared, आपके पास कहीं write up लिखा हुआ नहीं होगा. तो ये question आप how elasticity of demand for foreign exchange is influenced by elasticity of home demand for import. तो what determining, because demand for import, import का जो demand होगा वो generate करता है demand for the foreign currency. So if the demand for import is inelastic, then demand for foreign currency is also inelastic. Suppose we are demanding or using or importing oil, it is inelastic. So if demand for the dollar will also become inelastic. In that way you have to relate and then you have to build up on that. तो ये part आपको add करना था इसमें. Then elasticity approach, absorption approach, ये सब state question जिसको आप इसका parallel टेस्ट सीरीज के अंदर आप देख सकते हैं. मैकेनिज्म ऑफ एडजस्टमेंट इन द इवेंट ऑफ डिसइक्विलिब्रियम इन द बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट. स्टॉपलेस सैमुअल्सन थ्योरम, स्टेट एंड एक्सप्लेन स्टॉपलेस सैमुअल्सन थ्योरम. दैट मीन्स अ लॉट ऑफ क्वेश्चन जिसके का आपके पास राइट अप प्रेजेंट है और आपने उसको लिख रखा है, वैसे क्वेश्चन आपको पेपर के अंदर मिल जाते हैं. So finally the last question in 7th A was on the Lewis model. 7th A was on the Lewis model. You can see that question, paper 1. Structural transformation theory of the economy as explained by the Lewis theory. तो Lewis theory का क्वेश्चन भी रेगुलरली पेपर पे अंदर है. तो वो पहला स्टेटमेंट इस नोट्स के अंदर बिगिन होता है, द लुइस मॉडल इज एन एग्जांपल ऑफ स्ट्रक्चरल चेन थ्योरी ऑफ डेवलपमेंट एंड इट इज बेस्ड अपॉन ड्यूलिज्म, दैट मीन्स कोएग्जिस्टेंस ऑफ ट्रेडिशनल सेक्टर एंड द मॉडर्न सेक्टर टुगेदर. इलैबोरेट दैट ट्रेडिशनल सेक्टर एंड मॉडर्न सेक्टर, हाउ लेबर विल ट्रांसफर फ्रॉम ट्रेडिशनल सेक्टर टू द मॉडर्न सेक्टर, हाउ इनिशियली द सरप्लस लेबर विल गो, then there will be disguised unemployment, and finally there will be commercialization of agriculture. And not only that, there will be a transfer of labor, but there will also be a transfer of food from traditional sector to the modern sector. And then since it is a 20 marks question, you can specify the drawback or limitation part as well. Then the advantage and disadvantage of the PPP, public private partnership. Again, pros and cons of the import substitution and export promotion strategy. So in the syllabus, one specific topic is trade policy in the developing countries. So from the trade policy in developing countries, this question was there, trade policy in the developing countries. Finally जो 8th question है उसके अंदर one question is for the human development HDI, describe the major components of HDI. तो ये बहुत easy question हो गया आपके लिए. Major components of the HDI, so it is a life expectancy index, education index, per capita income index. एजुकेशन इंडेक्स के लिए मीन ईयर ऑफ स्कूलिंग, एक्सपेक्टेड ईयर ऑफ स्कूलिंग. एक्सप्लेन दैट, व्हाट डू यू मीन बाय मीन ईयर, व्हाट डू यू मीन बाय एक्सपेक्टेड ईयर. So mean year, like how many year a person has went to school, and expected year, how many years a 5-year child is expected to go to school. फिर डायमेंशन का इंडेक्स निकालने के लिए कंट्री की वैल्यू लेते हैं माइनस मिनिमम अपॉन मैक्सिमम माइनस मिनिमम. सो यूज दैट कॉमन फॉर्मूला ऑल्सो. And the drawback side was that it include the life expectancy without in considering the quality of life. It consider the how many years a children has went to school without considering the quality of schooling or quality of the education. So you can explain that. और ये पार्ट यहाँ पे compare human development, so it was related. And the last one question was the Kuznets inverted U hypothesis, but not in the category of environment. It was basically for inequality, how inequality and the growth are related. So initially in the process of growth, inequality will rise and then inequality will reduce. So reason for rising inequality and the reason for declining inequality. And the last question was the again a repeated question many times asked, distinguish between the warranted rate of growth and the natural growth, and the knife edge instability problem. Knife edge instability problem. So again you have that question in the past. So if you see all those questions, अगर आप ये सारे question analyze करें properly, then what you find here is out of that 28 question, I have just prepared. Out of that 28 question, in fact 8 to 9 question were new. So 8 to 9 question were new out of 28. That means about overwhelmingly you can say it is past year, but not completely past year. So if you are attempting 8 to new question and that to 2 to 3 question in the compulsory, तो कंपल्सरी में आपके पास फिर चॉइस लिमिटेड हो जाता है. तो योर स्टडी फॉर इकोनॉमिक्स ऑप्शनल विल बी दैट यू मस्ट बी प्रिपेयरिंग फॉर द न्यू क्वेश्चन, बट ओवरऑल आपको पास्ट ईयर का क्वेश्चन करना है बिकॉज वो बल्क है, वो बल्क ऑफ द क्वेश्चन वही होगा. तो अगेन अबाउट यू कैन से 70% क्वेश्चन तो पास्ट ईयर बेस रिपीट हो रहे हैं. तो 70% क्वेश्चन तो ये, बट अबाउट 25-30% क्वेश्चन आपको न्यू मिलने हैं. तो न्यू में भी ऐसा नहीं होगा कि इट इज़ नॉट कम्प्लीटली अनप्रडिक्टेबल, बिकॉज यू कैन सी वेरी क्वेश्चन लाइक प्रोपोर्शनल और परसीव्ड, वो टेस्ट के अंदर इंक्लूडेड, दैट मीन्स वी कैन एंटिसिपेट दोज क्वेश्चन टू बी कमिंग. तो वैसे और भी क्वेश्चन है कई सारे. तो टेस्ट अटेम्प्ट करने का एक्चुअली में पर्पस होता है दैट इफ यू आर टेकिंग अ टेस्ट एंड इन दैट टेस्ट पेपर 1 के अंदर ही इन द सीरीज इन पेपर 1 itself, if there was 10 टेस्ट इन फर्स्ट पेपर इन पेपर 1, every test include 28 question, so you are attempting in fact 280 question in paper 1. So that means a lot of questions are there and many questions are in fact repeated. It include the combination is basically including the past year question, clubbing it with new question. तो उसी proportion में टेस्ट भी फ्रेम किए जाते हैं. 70% क्वेश्चन भी विल टेक इन फ्रॉम द पास्ट ईयर, 30% क्वेश्चन आपको न्यू भी होंगे. हर टेस्ट के अंदर ये कंपोजिशन मिलता है. बिकॉज इफ़ यू डू नॉट हैव अ हैबिट ऑफ राइटिंग और रीडिंग द न्यू टॉपिक और प्रिपेयरिंग द न्यू टॉपिक, देन यू कैन नॉट एक्सपेक्ट योरसेल्फ टू सॉल्व न्यू क्वेश्चन इन द एग्जामिनेशन हॉल. इफ़ योर प्रिपरेशन इज ओनली बेस्ड अपॉन पास्ट ईयर, तो एडेप्टिव जैसे एक्सपेक्टेशन के अंदर मिस्टेक होते हैं, वो मिस्टेक होने के चांस होंगे. सो you should be preparing in a rational way. So incorporate all those information. What is the pattern of question and so. So I think we have explained the all dimensions of this paper. So again in the end just see that breakup part. So when you are preparing, prepare or put equal importance on micro, macro, मनी बैंकिंग एंड फाइनेंस. बट मनी बैंकिंग एंड फाइनेंस के क्वेश्चन न्यू क्वेश्चन की कैटेगरी में सॉल्व ज़्यादा थे, मतलब 2 क्वेश्चन फ्रॉम द न्यू क्वेश्चन. रेगुलर क्वेश्चन थोड़े कम रहे. इंटरनेशनल और ग्रोथ एंड डेवलपमेंट के अंदर रेगुलर क्वेश्चन काफ़ी सारे. सो व्हेन यू आर प्रिपेयरिंग, जस्ट प्रिपेयर फॉर all the question. That means if you do not want to leave anything on chance, then complete past year question and some about 30%, 25% the new question as well. Clear? So, I will record a similar lecture for paper 2 also, and in that paper again we will be analyzing what are the weightage for the different section like agriculture, industry, public finance, monetary management. What were the weightage of the new question, because there is a myth that it is could be overwhelmingly dominated by the recent topics. So, how much is the importance of current affairs in that, or the data role of data in that. So, all things will be discussed in that paper 2 discussion. Clear? Thank you.